Welcome to Season 2 of the Culinary Saijiki podcast. This season, I'm going back to haiku's roots, pun intended, and focusing on how agriculture and food show up in the work of the classical poets. For more food and haiku goodness, you can read the blog at culinarysaijiki.com. And if you would like to be a guest this season, go to the blog and fill out the contact form. You can support the project by going to buymeacoffee.com/culinarysaijiki or simply share this show with whoever you think would enjoy it. All right, let's get started with today's topic. All right, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I am once again recording this intro in my car. I did not record the main episode in my car, but once again, it was a Tuesday and I had time to kill before my session, so I'm just sitting in a parking garage and just making some good use of my time with the technology I have available. So a couple of exciting announcements before I get to the main episode. First, my chapbook, Postcards from Texas, is now available for pre-order through Cuttlefish Books. I will put that link in the show notes. I am in the lineup with Leonard D. Moore and Julie Bloth-Kelsey. I am so lucky to be part of that haiku triumvirate. And so you can pre-order just my chapbook, or you can pre-order the bundle and get yourself some sweet deals. And this is my third chapbook, but my first all haiku chapbook. It was a long time coming. It was a long journey. I'll probably do a whole episode about that at some point, but I don't want to spend too much time because my guest, Elliot Nicely, and I had a long, involved conversation, and I want to focus on that. The next bit of exciting news is this podcast is finally, partway through season 2, is finally on Apple Podcasts. So if that is your listening platform of choice, the way it is for me, and you've been diligently listening on Spotify or Google or directly from the website, I salute you. You can find Culinary Saijiki on Apple Podcasts now, and I am so very, very happy about that. So excited. And don't forget that at the end of this month, we have our community open mic. There's a voice memo link in the show notes for you to record your haiku. The theme is on transitions. Please say your name, your location if comfortable, and read your haiku twice. Of course, food should be involved. And they between season 1 and season 2, my hosting platform did a huge change. So if for some reason that voice memo link is not working properly, please reach out to me. It seems to be working from my end, but as anyone who's worked in IT knows, just because it works on your end doesn't mean it works on someone else's end. So if you are trying to send something for that community open mic and you can't get it to work, again, please let me know. I don't have ESP. It doesn't send me alerts like, blurp, blurp, your button isn't working. That's not how it works. So always let me know if you're running into technological challenges. On the blog, I have a post about when animals are or are not considered meat for the purposes of my research and this show and the writing I do. That was a fun one to write. It makes reference to haiku mostly by Basho and Busan, and yeah, it was a good one to think through. It was a research question that I had been working on for a while, and go check it out. All right, now let's just get into the main conversation. Today I am talking to Elliot Nicely. I actually talked to him last week. I'm recording this, 4 days later. Elliot and I met for the first time at Haiku North America. He is from Cleveland, which, has my heart forever. And the Cleveland connections are real strong for me right now because Elliot's my guest this week. Cuttlefish Books is also based in Cleveland. But anyway, Yeah, Elliot and I bonded. He's super fun. He was part of the karaoke haiku night of ridiculousness that was our last Saturday night at the festival. And yeah, I just had so much fun. I'm glad I got the chance to meet him, and I'm super glad he decided to uh, fill out the form to be on this show. Uh, when he wrote to me, as a little context, it was about less about classical haiku and more about his chapbook, his most recent chapbook. That is the focus of our discussion, and that is a collection that is based on agriculture and rural life. So while he is obviously a contemporary haiku poet, agriculture is something that is important not just to our current system but to the classical tradition. So I felt like it fit in really well with what I'm trying to do here. Elliot also said that he didn't have any food haiku, and then you'll hear me say in the episode, like, you definitely had, he's definitely read some food haiku uh, from that book. So I do tease him a little bit, and when you hear that, that's what I'm referring to. Is he did say, "Oh, I don't have any," and I said, "Well, come on anyway, let's just talk." And then it ended up being about food and so many other things. Elliot is someone you can really get into the weeds with. He's one of those people that expresses his opinion really well with a lot of thought and care. And I'm just so glad that I had the chance to have him on the show. If you do want to buy his chapbook, or not buy, it's actually available for free. He did a really limited run of copies. Information about that comes toward the end of our discussion, and I will mention it in the show notes. Anyway, like I said, we did talk for a pretty long time. There are some slight issues with the sound. I'm still getting in the swing of my new equipment. And in fact, I was going by the seat of my pants because it turns out I had the wrong adapter uh, to connect Zoom to my nice new recording interface. So the sound didn't come out as much as I wanted it to for my, new setup. But you know what? That's okay. It was a great
I
conversation, and I
am
think you will
excited to
enjoy
be
it.
here today with Elliot Nicely, who I got to meet for the first time at Haiku North America. Elliot has been publishing Japanese short form poetry for nearly 20 years. In 2019, his work was included in a new Resonance 11, Emerging Voices in English Language Haiku from Red Moon Press. I'm sure everyone listening knows what Red Moon Press is, but just to be precise, Elliot has also published 3 chapbooks, including this year's release entitled Weathered Clapboard. So, welcome, and thank you for being my first guest of season 2. So you had mentioned in our
Thanks for
Facebook
having me. I'm
Messenger
excited to be here.
that this chapbook was a love letter to an old farmer. And am I remembering that correctly? I don't have my chat history right in front of me.
I originally what this was born out of was a proposal that Jay Friedenberg had submitted to the planning committee, which I was a part of for H&A. And he was doing an analysis of Frog Pond, trying to define whether the majority of the poems had an urban bent, whether they had a rural bent, or whether it was indistinguishable. And he was looking for trends over time, and where that divide resided. And it gave me a moment of pause in thinking about my own writing and my own life, in that I grew up very rural. I was raised in Hunts Corners, Ohio, which is largely 6 to 7 miles from the nearest town. And I now reside in Lakewood, Ohio, which is the nearest suburb to Cleveland, to the west. And so it gave me a moment to go back to my own writing. And in curating through my own writing, I try to it gave me a moment of pause of where does my divide reside, and what has been the most influential. And I divided my work in the same way that Jay was looking across Frog Pond. And what I found was that even though I've spent the last 10 years here in Lakewood, that still to this day, the my work is so heavily influenced by my rural experience growing up, and going through those poems that led to a manuscript weathered clapboard, which was picked up by Buddha Baby Press, which was run by Stanford Forrester. And it was, and where I live in Lime Township in Hunts Corners here in Ohio, I'm the fourth generation to reside from my family, and my nephew Owen is the fifth generation. But we originally came there, arrived there as farmers. And it was Cassius Aaron Nicely, who the book is dedicated to, that brought the family to Lime Township for the first time. And he was a farmer. And so we have a deep-seated connection to the land. And our community is based on our relationship to the land. And so this book was born out as almost a love letter to those relationships and that work, and a life that so many people rarely understand. There was a time before the advent of tractors that 80% of Americans were engaged in agricultural work. Now it's 1.3%. And so a lot of people really don't have a clear understanding of where their food comes from. And if they do keep gardens, it's more of a passing fancy. It's more supplemental or a hobby. It's not necessary. And so there's a different understanding and pressure and responsibility when that becomes not only a source of food for your family, but also becomes a source of income for your family that is make or break for their future.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I have probably mentioned this on the show before, but one of the things that was mind-blowing to me is I grew up in the super duper suburbs. I grew up in Hudson, Ohio, the suburbiest. But my partner, I've mentioned, he was born and raised on, a farm, and his parents had jobs. They weren't all in on being farmers because it's not a way to make a living, really. But it's still, it's still like a small family farm. There's sheep and chickens. But I remember it's just, the farmhouse is surrounded by fields, and some years it's corn and some years it's soybeans. And it was maybe not the first, I think it was maybe we'd been together about 3 years, and I finally went out one time in the spring when everything was all coming up, and I was amazed. And John is like, oh, but none of that's food. Like, none of that corn has any nutrient value. That is all going into, ethanol or, this, that, and the other thing. And so we're driving through these giant fields of corn and beans. And and none of this is actually edible, because that's growing food, it turns out, is really not a sustainable living. It's just doing corn and beans to sell to industry. And that was super shocking to me.
It's there's a balance where I'm from, where there was certainly people who were doing production that was all for edible consumption, and there were other people who were engaged in agrarian economics, where the production was going towards, like you said, larger industries. So, and some people did try to strike a balance between those two things. It's the one thing you just find with any farming is diversification is, that's the survival. It's so necessary, and when you don't have that, you really can close the future for your farm and for the land.
Yeah, you really can. And I know John's family also, they have a cabin that also used to be another farm, that just it had gotten very depleted at one point, and it had long been out of production. And his mom got a grant to put in wildflowers to regenerate the soil. That's been going on for a few years, and now it is finally, it's farmable again, but mostly what it's being used for is orchard, just fruit trees and walnut trees. So it's it's delayed gratification, but in my retirement, if I am ever able to retire, I may not have Social Security, but I will have pears and apples and walnuts.
It's amazing that the number of people who, in the entertainment industry, who have sought out supplemental income or side work in agriculture have wound up making more money at that than they did ever in the industry of entertainment. Francis Ford Coppola
Yeah.
has by far made more money running his orchards and his wine production than he ever did as a director, and of course he's incredibly accomplished. And John Hughes, he walked away from Hollywood, and that's all he's engaged in.
I did not know that. What kind of farming does he do?
A little bit of everything, but that's, yeah. If you were ever wondering where John Hughes, like whatever became of him, he took his money and went a very different direction, but one that has served him well. I think he might have passed at this point. I think there's a possibility that I had heard that, but yeah. After Home Alone was a wrap, and he might have had one more project after that, so gone, and went right into farming.
That's amazing. I had no idea. Yeah. Well, since this is a haiku podcast, would you like to read a few haiku from your chapbook?
Yeah. What I was trying to capture in the essence of my chapbook was I wanted to recreate the experience for someone in a typical day in the summer. Because for most of us, summer is a time of renewal. It is this moment when the days are a little bit longer and it extends our free time, and all of a sudden we plan our vacations and we go about and begin to explore, and it just becomes this moment of renewal and rest and relaxation for so many of us. But for the American farmer, it's quite the opposite. That is their busy season, and their renewal and their relaxation comes in the winter. So in the course of putting together this chapbook, I wanted to really look at, I tried to structure this in the course of what would one day look like. And my hope is that by the time you got to the end, that you felt a sense of exhaustion, and that you didn't feel that sense of renewal and relaxation and calm, that you were almost tired by the end. And so that was the driving arc behind the way it's organized. I'll start us off here. Wisps of fog gathering morning light, a steelhead rises. Wisps of fog gathering morning light, a steelhead rises. First touch of gray, the weathered clapboard of a distant barn. First touch of gray, the weathered clapboard of a distant farm, asking one more time, the breath of a prairie dawn, asking one more time, the breath of a prairie dawn.
I love that. I love the way those pieces invoke the different phases of of morning and the early morning hours, and just how gosh darn horrifically early farmers have to get up.
And during that period of time, that sense of waking up tired.
Yeah.
And I really want to capture the essence of that. The possibility of the day, and looking forward to the work, but also that waking up tired.
Absolutely. And you know, it is one of those things where summer is a very active season for the farmer. And you know, winter is that period of rest and renewal, but like also depending on what the kind of farming you're doing, a lot of the work never really ends. Like if you have livestock, I'm like, how do people who do livestock, do they just never take vacations? I think that is a lot of it is or you've got to have people you can really trust, right? Because the work is really always there.
It is, especially if you're involved in dairy. Dairy twice a day, and it is. They don't wait for you to take 2 weeks off. There's, the cows don't care if you're going to Disney or not. Nobody wants to, the chickens are still going to lay eggs whether you're off to Hilton Head or the Outer Banks. It's so there is in our community and in the rural community, there is a real sense of responsibility to one another that I don't think a lot of people fully appreciate. And in those moments when you fall upon illness or injury, or even in moments when you need those vacations, you have to call upon the people in your community to step forward and fill those gaps. And sometimes that's your family, and sometimes it isn't. And so where I didn't grow up on a farm, I worked on them all the time. And we had very specific roles that we were utilized for. There was a crew of us that worked 4 or 5 different farms during certain periods. And but the sense of community was such that we would lay out our schedule with all of the area farmers, and they would cut the straw and cut the hay fields according to our availability. And so, they are counting on us, they are planning on us to be available during a certain window of time. And we have that responsibility to do that work during that time. And knowing that we also have to have the work complete because we have another farm waiting on our labor. It's just a day or two later. So it creates a sense of accountability to one another, and so I think when people think of rural, oftentimes they're like, oh, I just want to get away from the city. But if you're really immersed in the rural community, it is very much a community where you have that. You have those connections and responsibilities and to your neighbors.
Yeah, this is something that actually, in my deep philosophical discussions with my partner, this is actually something that comes up a lot for us because, again, he's super country. And now we live in St. Louis, which is what I would call an old city. But we both lived many years in Austin, Texas, which I would consider a new city. And that's a whole interesting distinction. But when I think of old cities, I think of like our house is 130 years old and it's, made of brick. And or I think of in the Italian neighborhood, you can't buy a house there because all the immigrants' families still just pass their houses on generation to generation, and like no one, it's there. And St. Louis is not like as walkable as like New York City, and it doesn't have. It has better public transit than Austin, but like when I think of like old cities, like Cleveland's an old city, St. Louis, New York, San Francisco. Like old cities like that and rural communities, to me, I actually like, they get so posited as being like on these opposite ends of this spectrum where the city is like impersonal and dark and everyone's gonna run up and stab you at any given moment. And then the rural is either, romanticized in an overly bucolic way. Or the rural is also feared and like it's, deliverance and the wolves are just going to be at your door all the time. And, like someone will come up and murder you and no one will hear you scream. Also like not true, right? Or, a lot of sort of denigration of political denigration of, rural people as though rural people were all a political monolith, which they are not. But this is a long way of getting to the point that like having like lived in an old city and I've spent a lot of time in the country, like both are places where you have to be incredibly pro-social. And like there is a commitment to the community and maybe someone who doesn't live there is not going to see it. But we think about like the way that, yes, you're on a crew and you've got to get to 4 farms a day and people are depending on your labor. Or here, like we've had this stoplight out for like, it's a 4-way stop. It's been out for days. And it's always part of my commute. Like there's like no other way for me to get to where I'm going. And like everyone is so orderly and nice. And I've never felt like I'm going to get, rammed in that intersection. And there's a joke video on the internet that saying the punchline is St. Louis, it's the friendliest place to get murdered. But it's like I'm driving around my neighborhood and if someone's being maybe a little obnoxious, I'm not going to honk at them because it's probably my neighbor and I'm going to like have to see them again. And there is something about the city and the country are very different, but there is something about like either way you are in a community. And something about the nature of cities and of rural areas, like it makes you pay attention to the extent to which like you really are connected. If you like, John stays up all night and one night there's a catalytic converter theft like happening to our neighbor's Jeep right outside his window and he just like leaned out and he's like a big 6'2", type, Hemingway shaped kind of guy. And he just like leans down and yells at them and they were just like off, and it is all these, they are very different. And yet there is something about both of them where you just see how much like we all need each other in our own way.
Yeah. When I was working on this collection, I was working with Stanford Forrester, who is the editor-in-chief of Buddha Baby Press and Bottle Rockets Press. And we were talking about one of his older anthologies that he had done that I think is just wonderful. And it was an anthology that was driven by county fairs and festivals and amusement parks. And I really wish, and I hope he's listening, I really wish he would reprint this. And I've said that to him, and I don't mind saying it to the rest of the world, or even just putting it out in the ether that to motivate him. But there is a distinct difference between an amusement park and a county fair, and the nuances. And this was Stanford's take on it. He said, you go to Coney Island, and there's an anonymity there, and there are dark corners where you can slip away and you can engage in things that are a little nefarious. You don't have that luxury at a county fair because these are all your neighbors. Everyone knows you. And so if you drink too much, or you get too loud, or you step out of line, it is an audience of your entire community. And so the difference is, Coney Island is a place of amusement, where the county fair is a place of celebration. You're there to celebrate the work that you've done over the course of the harvest, but you're also there to celebrate some of the adjacent skills or hobbies that you've mastered in your free time as well, whether it's quilting or a pie crust or whatever it may be. And whether you've just become a master carver. And so the county fair is this time of celebration, but there's a level of community and accountability and relationship building there that doesn't necessarily exist in all of these other spheres. And so it is incredibly different. So I have a haiku that is, I guess, a little more experimental compared to what I normally write. And this is not in the collection, but something new I've been working on. And here it is. Becoming another silhouette of a grain elevator. Becoming another silhouette of a grain elevator.
Is that I'm really curious, is it a 1-line or a 3-line?
3-line.
Okay. I pictured it as a 1-line. That isn't that is not editorial advice. But that's like the way my synesthesia was like displayed it for me. Did you climb grain elevators as a kid?
Oh, no.
You were a reasonable child.
Because again, this was your neighbor. This is someone you probably worked for. This was someone that in a moment's notice could call your dad, and he was going to pick up. And there was an accountability for your actions. There was not that anonymity. So it was out of mutual respect that you respected their space and their property, because that could be because you depended on it. And I just remember coming home from wrestling practice, and one of the neighbor's dogs had gotten loose and was in the road, and my brother just touched the brakes and hit a patch of black ice. We went into a spin. We wound up down in a ditch, but it was one of the neighbors who came by with one of their tractors and pulled us out and put us back. And there was no damage to the car, no damage to the dog. But there was, had we had to sit on the side of that road in the middle of the night, in bad weather, waiting on a tow truck, as far out as we are from the nearest town, it could have been close. And so that's you respected those relationships, that because they serve you, they serve your security and safety in a lot of ways.
I think I was thinking more of like John talked about like there was an abandoned grain elevator because he like his small town was just sort when he was in high school, his small town was getting smaller by the year, and there was an abandoned one and they climbed, like he tells me these stories and I'm alternately like retroactively afraid for him, and I just think like, wow, you kind of had a way cooler childhood than I did.
I mean, in some respects, you once you began working on these farms, you were called upon to do work in all of these spaces. So there wasn't always that novelty there. That was like, I mean, when you're 7 or 8 and you're building forts in a hay mound, you're like, oh, this is amazing. Wow, I would love to grow up on a farm. Well, when you're stacking straw in a hay mound, maybe 5 or 6 years later,
that
novelty goes away.
Yeah.
So
Do you know the Gary Snyder poem "Hay is for Horses"?
no,
It's not the right title. I can find it. I might just. Why don't you read us a couple more haiku, and I actually might just see if I can pull that up and like read it, because it's sort of it's really appropriate to what you were saying.
Yeah. Well, speaking of hard work, the next three will be about the labor of the day. Midsummer storm, all the ways the willow bends. Midsummer storm, all the ways the willow bends. Midday heat, even the scarecrow's shoulders slouch. Midday heat, even the scarecrow's shoulders slouch. Picking peppers, the sun sits atop a full basket. Picking peppers, the sun sits atop a full basket.
And so you said you didn't have any food haiku, and you just did.
Not necessarily about the process of cooking, but
that's what the part of the point of like doing this whole project is to talk about really, every facet of the journey that, our food takes to get to our plates. It is to connect us to like that, the viscerality of it, the cycle of it. So that's why when I'm talking about culinary, I am taking a really broad view.
Something that struck me about your H&A presentation is there was a comment about how so many of the culinary based haiku were written by women. Which is a really strange phenomenon for me that struck me as a little odd, because in my family, it's all the men who cook. It's been that way for generations. I mean, my grandfather measured everything just with the scoop of his hand, and my grandmother was beside herself when he passed away because she could barely make scrambled eggs. And my mother was really no different. My dad managed every meal in the kitchen, and my mom struggled to boil water. And even still now, I spent the last good bit of this summer teaching my oldest son how to grill and passing those things down. And so it doesn't necessarily come through in my writing, I've found, but I was a little surprised that more men don't, that so many of the haiku that you see come through journals and in your podcasts are coming from women. I guess because my own personal experience is a little bit different.
And that's like, I sort of wonder how much of that is, there is something egalitarian about living on a farm, in that there is always work and it always needs to be done. And if you are physically able to do it, it does not matter what your gender is. Like John's maternal grandparents, when they got married, she was 20-ish and he was 40. And he had, as a 40-year-old man, he knew how to cook, and she didn't really know how to cook because she worked as a nurse and took her meals at a boarding house in Springfield. And her 40-year-old husband taught her to cook. And John's dad did a lot of the cooking, and now I've just accepted that I have a partner who's a better cook than me, and I'm just going to embrace it. But I do sort of think about like how their gendered stuff is always complicated, and there is we don't have any sort of true parity or equity right now, and have not ever. But there is something about when you are in that situation, and there is always something to do that. There is, in many ways, something just that, at least to me, I could be wrong, that feels more egalitarian about it.
I've certainly, growing up, I've certainly unloaded hay wagons where there were women on the crew, stacking, unloading, up in the mound. It's to your point, if there was work that needed to be done and you were able bodied, you contributed in whatever manner you could. And that was regardless of age as well. And that was everybody was expected to make some contribution, and that just becomes ingrained in you. And I think that's one of the things I struggle with sometimes. With I I shouldn't tell the story, but I'm going to. My upstairs neighbor is she's recently divorced as of 3 or 4 years ago, and so she has her divorce apartment, and her 4 able-bodied kids came over for Christmas, and there was a storm, and not one of them would pick up a shovel and clear the driveway or the sidewalk. Not a single one of them. I mean, there's no limitations. Not the boys, not the girls, and yet they are turning up to their mother's home expecting a spread of food, which they've contributed nothing to, and just to be served and to enjoy the day and to contribute nothing. And I struggled with that. I really, really struggled with that. Having witnessed that, I can't imagine showing up empty-handed, let alone just telling my mom, well, you'll just have to wait until it melts off, because she's past a point that she can do those things. And if you were wondering what I was doing in the midst of all of this, there's 3 neighbors who are older, and I was clearing their driveways and sidewalks so that their families could come, because their children are much older. Their children are in their 50s, and so that's where I was lending my energy. But that was a bit of a struggle for me.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of the sensibilities and values and expectations of growing up where I did, and what is expected, which is contribute what you can, where you can.
Absolutely. So, I got some of that too, even though I wasn't rural. But I think there's a certain Midwesternness that gets stuck with you. So this is not a haiku, but it is. I did find that Gary Snyder poem, and it's so I think it's so germane to what we're talking about that I'm just going to divert and read it. And I did have the title wrong. It's called "Hay for the Horses," and this isn't a haiku, but Gary Snyder. He did tell Jack Kerouac to be more disciplined in his own haiku practice. That was like the thing I remember most from Stanford Forester's Jack Kerouac talk on poetry. Hay for the horses. He had driven half the night from far down San Joaquin through Mariposa, up the dangerous mountain roads, and pulled in at 8 a.m. with his big truckload of hay behind the barn. With winch and ropes and hooks, we stacked the bales up clean to splintery redwood rafters, high in the dark flecks of alfalfa, whirling through shingle cracks of light, itch of hay dust in the sweaty shirt and shoes. At lunchtime, under black oak, out in the hot corral, the old mare nosing lunch pails, grasshoppers crackling in the weeds. I'm 68, he said. I first bucked hay when I was 17. I thought that day I started, I sure would hate to do this all my life. And damn it, that's just what I've gone and done.
it was always. I think there's a level of expectation when I got to be a certain age where for Christmas my dad always bought me a pair of leather gloves, knowing that in the summertime we were gonna work the farms, and at the end of the season they would be so completely destroyed that I would throw them out. There was nothing to salvage, and I would need another pair at Christmas time the next season, and that just became a tradition until I essentially went off to college. But I always knew one of my Christmas gifts throughout junior high and high school was going to be a pair of those leather gloves. And I was glad for it because there were guys I worked with who didn't. And their hands were just, you just admired it.
Yeah.
Just thick hands. Yeah. The thinking about that idea of everybody contributing. I have two poems to that, and I thought about during the time that my great grandfather Cassius Aaron Nicely, who my chapbook is dedicated to, when he was farming, and they would have the threshing crews come in, and the idea is basically there would be in your community there would be one thresher, but everybody got to use it. And it required so many people that you would work somebody else's land without any expectation of payment, without any expectation of a portion or a percentage of their yield, and knowing that eventually that thrasher was coming to work your land, and that whoever and all of these people were helping one another. And so in thinking about that, I was thinking about at the end, they would set up these huge tables to feed everybody at the end of the long day. And so this next coup is a reflection on that. Late supper, the crisscrossing of bats beneath a barn light. Late supper, the crisscrossing of bats beneath a barn light. And also, you were talking about where everybody's expected to contribute, and at whatever age, in whatever way, and so even there are times that in the off seasons, they would take. It was almost a rite of passage for so many of us that once you hit 5th grade, you would go do your hunter's training course. You were 10 years old, you were old enough, and you would go do your 2 weekends doing your hunter's training safety and get your hunting license. And then if you were really ambitious, maybe do a bonus weekend and go get your trapping license. But there was an expectation that when you went hunting, that it was not for sport, and that you were taught this deep appreciation for the land and what it provided you, and that it would sustain your family, and that you were helping to contribute to that. And so this was a poem that doesn't appear in the collection, but one that I had written for my brother, who still is an active hunter. So here we are. Escaping steam from the field-dressed deer, deep autumn. Escaping steam from the field-dressed deer, deep autumn.
That is an incredibly visceral image.
It really is, yeah. But the idea is there's almost, when they take that picture of a 10-year-old standing in front of his first deer or squirrel or rabbit or whatever it happens to be, there is a sense of pride in that this helped to contribute to feed the family. And that's how it's viewed. It's not for sport. It's not for trophy, but but this was an opportunity to contribute in your own small way, because that venison that can feed and help sustain the family through the winter, and in a way that is really, really going to make life much more leisure.
It makes me think of. I'm like, John should just be guest hosting this episode, really. But he's talked to me often about how, when he was 7, he got a runt calf from his uncle and bottle fed it and raised it up, and then at 7 years old took it to the slaughterhouse and brought it out in a box. And he said, and he and his brother had to do it, and he said we all cried and none of us became vegetarians. And I think I probably would, like, just knowing me, like, if you'd made me do that at 7, I would have 100% just never touched meat again, probably. Because that's just sort of how, at any given day, I'm like one step away from just being a vegetarian. If I had to kill my own food, it would just be like chickpeas for life. But I think there is something about that to be like just sort of exposed to that as a kid. I can only imagine that it has just a profound impact on your relationship to an understanding of where food comes from, and the life you are taking so the rest of your family can eat. And I think the whole picture of contributing, my guess is that for many people it gives them a different relationship to work as just something that you all need to do to stay alive. Whereas, like, honestly, for me, like, a lot of chores were like punishment, right? Like, you screw up and then you have to do extra chores, and like, well, that just gave me ultimately led me to thinking that work is on some level punishment, when it's not. That's just what needs to be done.
So my grandfather, Willard Nicely, he was 16, and his father, Cassius, suffered his 4th stroke in his 50s and died. And so he's 16, and he's responsible for running the family farm at 16, in the throes of the Great Depression.
Oh God!
Like, nobody eats if the work doesn't get done, and you're a kid, by every measure. But you got to grow up pretty fast, and so the work, but knowing the work is different than doing the work. And so now everything depends on that labor and that effort, and there's no time off. And then and so that sense of duty and just that relationship to family and community was incredibly important in our family, and that was instilled in us, and largely it was driven out of that. Because nobody had time for your tears. Nobody had time for you to figure out how to do this. It had to be done, and it had to be done now. And so he didn't get to mourn, it's because the work has to be done. It doesn't wait. The cows don't wait. The winter wheat doesn't wait. And so that's the world moves on, and you get left behind if you even so much as pause. And so there's and you begin to pick up a bit on that in the television series Yellowstone. That there's the work is always waiting for you, and no matter what the given tragedy may be, the world keeps moving, it keeps turning, and you have to keep step with it, or otherwise it not only compromises your future, but so many other people that are dependent on you in that moment.
Yeah,
yeah.
Oh no,
so
go ahead.
I have a haiku that I'll share that touches on that. Low hanging sun, the pregnant heifer's gait. Low hanging sun, the pregnant heifer's gait.
So much depends upon a heifer.
Yes, yeah, it really does. That's
Yeah. You know, and I think like one of the things I feel like if I could, because we have actually been recording past time. We're just having such a lovely
oh
conversation.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and I need to get back to work in 10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But I think if I could like my big takeaway from our 48 minutes so far is is how when you really like are in this stuff and you stop to consider it, like you realize just how much of like this overemphasis on individualism that seems to be, you know, endemic to the United States really doesn't serve us in any meaningful way. And the world is, you know, the world itself is not malicious, but like the world is just going to do what the world does, and people will still need to eat, and there will still be, you will still have your personal tragedies, but and those are hard, but nothing stops for you. Like there, you can stop, but the world is still going to keep doing its thing.
Well, I think I've got the right poem to close with then.
All right.
All right. My last coup I'll share with you. Storm waves through the winter wheat. How wrong I've been. Storm waves through the winter wheat. How wrong I've been.
Oh yes, that is exactly, exactly. 10 out of 10, no notes, as as the millennials say.
I appreciate that.
But really, like that is, yeah, that is absolutely just the right poem to end on. So I say, unless you have any last comments, can people get your book on Red Moon Press or?
Oh, actually,
Oh, sorry, your Baby Buddha. Sorry, I am.
yeah,
Yeah.
actually, I printed a limited edition run of 150 with
Oh.
the only intention I had was to set them out at at the Haiku North America conference and simply give them away because it tied into our theme, and I wanted people to have an opportunity to experience it, to experience the rural, where they did get to come to Cincinnati and experience the urban, and so I wanted to balance that out for them. But if there's anybody who didn't get a copy, who would like, they can simply just send me an email at ELLIOTNICELY Just Elliot Nicely at yahoo.com. Send me a note, and yeah, I'd be glad to drop one in the mail. I have just a few left, but yours went out in the mail yesterday, so you're guaranteed yours. But they are. It was a very limited edition, just commemorative piece, just for HNA, really. So.
Well, I am glad we have it. I'm excited to get my copy. I am doing the I'm finally getting around to doing the Seeley Challenge this August, where you read a book of poetry a day, and mine are gonna all be haiku. So yeah, I will add that to my stack.
Great. Yeah, it should arrive in just a few days.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a fantastic way to spend my lunch hour.
I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Allison. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, that is my conversation. And I would like to thank Elliot from the bottom of my heart for being my first guest of season 2 and for taking a risk and agreeing to come on the show, even though he wasn't entirely sure he was the right fit. In my view, just about anyone is the right fit. It's just, we just have to find, the angle. So if you have been hesitant to fill out the form to be a guest on the show, well, guess what? you are a good fit. And if you're not sure how to really feel like what you have to say resonates with the theme of the show, just talk to me. We will sort it out. I really do think that, at HNA, several people commented to me that, yeah, food and haiku is important. Talking about these two themes is important because everybody eats. We all have to eat. Uh, so even if you don't like to cook, even if you don't have a garden, you still have to eat. You still have a connection to this topic because you are human. So if you've always wanted to talk about haiku on a podcast, give this one a shot. We will have fun. I promise there is an angle that you can come at regarding this topic. Anyway, few reminders to wrap up. Remember, again, community open mic. Please, please do send me some stuff. I will reprint the guidelines in the show notes. And I know I said it at the top of the episode, but people always need to hear it. This is a thing I learned teaching, and I am like in teacher mode right now. If you're having trouble with the technology, please do reach out and let me know, because I don't have ESP. But I do want to help. I do want to help you figure out the problem if you're having a technology issue. So please just let me know. And last reminder, my chapbook, Postcards from Texas, is available for pre-order. This episode is going live on Wednesday, but the day I'm recording it is the day it officially went up. I am so excited. Really, it has made my whole month, and it's only the 1st of August. But please do go check it out, and I really do encourage you, just get the bundle with all 3 chapbooks. You are not going to be sorry that you ever bought anything that Leonard Nimoy ever wrote. You're just not. He is a 20th/21st century master, and I feel so lucky that I even met him for a few brief moments at HNA. And Julie Bluss Kelsey, also totally fantastic haiku poet, and I really love the cover of her book. And I know you're not supposed to say don't judge a book by its cover, but honestly, like, when the cover really fits, I think it's fantastic. So good on her. It's going to be great. I can't read her work. All right. If you do want to buy Elliot's book, I will drop a reminder for, not buy. Why do I keep saying buy? If you want to get a copy of it for free, I will remind you of that in the show notes. And if you want to support the show, you can do so financially by buying me a coffee. Link, of course, like everything else, is in the show notes. Or you can, now that we're on Apple Podcasts, maybe like leave a review there. I hate asking for reviews, and since I am a strictly amateur podcast hobbyist, I don't do it very often. But hey, now we're on Apple Podcasts, so I guess maybe leave a review there. That would be lovely. Or just share this with whoever you think might be interested. All right, thanks again to Elliot for being my very first guest of season 2. I'm very excited. I've got at least one more guest scheduled on the books already. And thank you for listening and being along for the ride.